Has your world ever collapsed in an instant? When you're completely happy, when you're making plans for the future, when it feels like everything in your life is about to come together, and then, in the blink of an eye, you're ready to say goodbye to this world? Mine did. I thought for a long time about whether I should tell you this story. I went through it alone, and it haunted me for a long time, reminding me of itself every night. But 6 months have passed now, and my soul has calmed enough for me to be able to share it. And I've decided to do it. Maybe you shouldn't listen to this story, but I need to tell it in order to finally set myself free. So, I'll start from the very beginning. Kate and I had lived together for 7 long years in a happy marriage. It wasn't just good, it was perfect. We were like two components that fit perfectly together. Every day started with a smile and small joys, having coffee together in the morning, weekend walks, laughter in the middle of the week. We were already talking about children. We discussed how many we'd have, 2 or 3, what we'd name them, boy or girl. It all sounded simple, but it was our life, and we were both happy. Then one day, on my way home from work, I drove down a road I usually didn't take. It just happened that way. Maybe I needed a distraction or time to think. Maybe I decided to change my usual route to avoid feeling like this day was blending into the others. Maybe I even wanted to feel a little freer. I don't know what made me turn onto that road I'd never driven down before. But that road led me to something I can't forget. Near a motel by the roadside, I noticed a car. At first, I just noticed its silhouette because it wasn't parked in a parking lot but right by the roadside, oddly placed a little away from the other cars. Then I realized it was her car, Kate's car. I felt a little uneasy. I was sure she was at work. We had an arrangement. She had gone there in the morning, and I didn't expect her to be back until late in the evening. I drove a little closer to get a better look at the car. It was definitely hers. There could be no mistake. But why was it here? And what was her car doing by the motel? The more I tried to come up with an explanation, the stranger the situation became. I couldn't understand what was going on, and it bothered me. All I knew for sure was that she should have been at work. My mind started racing through possibilities, but none of them seemed normal. Maybe she was waiting for someone? Maybe she was lost? But one thought kept haunting me. What if I'm missing something? I turned the corner, hiding my car. I didn't want her to see me. Maybe this was all just a coincidence, and if I went straight to her, I might ruin everything. I decided to wait. About 40 minutes later, the motel door opened and she appeared. Kate, my wife. I recognized her immediately, even though she was a bit farther away. But it wasn't that shocked me. She was with him, a man. I immediately understood this wasn't just a friend or a colleague. He was too close to her. He had his arm around her waist, they were laughing, and their gestures weren't just friendly. There was an intimacy between them that left me no room for doubt. I froze. I didn't know what to do, how to react. My wife, the one I loved, the one who was my life, was now walking with someone else. And I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he came from. My mind was spinning. Why her? Why with him? Why hadn't anyone told me? So many questions, but no answers. Instead of running over to them and causing a scene, I stayed in the car. I couldn't move. I didn't know what would be better, to jump out and cause a scandal or to wait, listen to everything, and try to understand. I chose the second option, but that didn't make me calmer. My fingers were trembling when I looked at them again. She didn't see me, and his embrace seemed perfectly natural to her. I needed to find out who he was, what this meant, and how it was possible. I could have given in to anger, but I probably already knew that this wasn't something you could just figure out easily. I watched her for the next few days, trying to find some explanation. She didn't say a word to me about that man. In her everyday life, There was nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. But now, every gesture, every word, every movement of hers carried new questions. I followed her steps, looking for moments when she acted strangely, when her attention seemed diverted. But her usual day was no different from before. She kept going to work, making dinners, meeting with friends. But between us, like an invisible wall, something had arisen. I could no longer look at her the way I used to. One day, while glancing at her phone, I stumbled upon a few strange messages. They were from the very man she had been with at the motel. Her replies were neutral, but something about those conversations raised alarms. She was hiding something, and I realized that now I had to find out the whole truth. As hard as it was, I knew I couldn't leave things as they were. I began to make a plan, not just to get answers, but to understand how this had been possible. What had been going on in her life that I didn't know about, and how had I been so blind? These questions tortured me, but they also gave me the motivation to keep moving forward. I was determined. From that moment on, everything became a game, and I couldn't afford to lose. I started gathering facts. For a long time, I watched her every move. And with each passing day, my suspicions became more and more grounded. I was close to uncovering the truth. And with that, I was also close to making my decision. I couldn't just leave things as they were. My mind was consumed by revenge, and I knew I wouldn't find peace until I had my answers. I was ready to take risks, to give everything in order to know the truth, even if it would hurt me. And I decided I wouldn't act impulsively. I had to prepare, to create the perfect plan. A month later, I had gathered enough information. I found out who that man was. His name was Michael. He was her colleague, but not just a colleague. He was the one she often mentioned in conversation, but there was never anything concrete about him. They worked on the same team, but often stayed late after work to discuss projects. And now, looking back, I began to understand how it had all come together. They had been slowly building their relationship, and I had been blind to it. I tracked all her movements. I knew when she left for work, when she returned, when she went to a friend's house, when she was having dinner with colleagues. Every step she took was like another clue, another small fragment of the puzzle. I waited for the right moment, preparing my trap. I set up a meeting with Michael. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary encounter, a casual meeting. But for me, it was like observing an enemy who didn't know I had become his adversary. We met at a cafe, and I was in a state of calm control. No emotions, just cold calculation. Michael turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist, which made him even more dangerous. He didn't look like the typical villain you could easily deal with. He was charming, intelligent, and I started to feel how his presence began to create cracks in my confidence. But I couldn't stop. I was too far in to turn back. I continued my investigation. Peeking into his social media, checking his work connections, I created a map of their relationship, where every step was documented. Now I had enough information to set a trap she wouldn't be able to avoid. I couldn't believe that the time had come when I had become so dependent on my observations. Everything was so carefully planned that even the slightest mistake could ruin everything. But I felt like I was getting closer to the moment of truth. The trap was ready. I had prepared everything so that she couldn't avoid it. She continued living her life, and it irritated me more and more. I tried not to show my anxiety, but something was tearing me apart inside. She was close, but at the same time so far away. I realized that every moment, every day with her now, was an echo of something I could no longer change. My life was no longer the same as it had been before. I arranged a casual meeting with her. We had dinner at a restaurant as usual, but this time I noticed that her behavior was a little more nervous. She checked her phone several times, hiding the screen from me. It wasn't a coincidence. I could feel that she was hiding something. Then I made my move. I left my phone open with several selected messages that she would definitely see. I knew she would notice, and I was watching her reaction closely. And just as I expected, she couldn't hold back. Within minutes, she glanced at my screen, then looked away. I saw her face turn pale in an instant. There was no need for words anymore. I knew something was wrong, that she was hiding something. But I didn't say a word. I sat quietly watching her, and in that moment it became clear to me. I had to play my last card. My game was just beginning. The day came when I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I knew that if I didn't act now, I'd never be able to move on from this. My soul was already wounded, but I was still standing at a crossroads. To end this game, or just walk away. I chose the former. I called her and told her we needed to talk. She agreed, although I could hear the worry in her voice. We met at our house. She came, as usual, with a smile, but I could see something was off. She had already sensed that I had found something out, but I was ready for this. I told her everything, all the details I'd gathered over these months. I described every encounter with Michael, every step he took, every word he said. She remained silent. This was what I expected. I didn't expect her to justify herself. I didn't want to hear any excuses, but what happened next shocked me. She didn't deny anything. She simply said she couldn't help but let herself be happy, that I had been busy, that everything had become empty and meaningless. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just sat there, looking at me, as if she herself didn't know what was happening to her. My first reaction was one of fury. I felt a hot wave of anger rising from within. But I knew I had to stay calm. All I did was tell her how deeply she had betrayed me. But inside, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. In that moment, I realized that my torment wouldn't end here. Revenge would become my goal, my need, and I would follow my plan to the end. After hearing her confession, there was no place for pity inside me. All I knew was that my life had been destroyed. I didn't know what to do with this pain that overwhelmed me. But I couldn't let myself show weakness. I knew that now my only goal was to get what I wanted. That's when I realized I needed more than just revenge. I needed to understand why this had happened, why she had done this. My suspicions were rooted in our past. Our relationship had always seemed perfect, but I started doubting that. Kate and I had become too relaxed, too confident that everything would stay the same as before. Maybe I had been wrong, but something in her behavior told me that she had been looking for a way out of this marriage for a long time. I remembered the moments when we were happy. We had planned our future, dreamed about children, and now she was in the arms of another man. How could she do this to me, lying for years? All this time, she had been with him, hiding it, not letting me understand anything. I kept thinking about it, trying to find an explanation. And one day, sitting in an empty room, I realized that this revenge wasn't just punishment for her. It was an attempt to reclaim myself, to reclaim my life, to regain my pride that had been trampled on. I wasn't ready to give her to him. I wasn't ready to just walk away. No, I had to go through with this to the end. I started taking action. Now I knew what I had to do. My plan was ready. I created the perfect trap for Kate and Michael, one from which they wouldn't be able to escape. I gathered all the evidence of her infidelity. She thought it would be easy, that she could return to her normal life. But I was ready to deliver the final blow. I set up a meeting with Michael. We met at the same cafe where I had seen him before. This time, I was sure he wasn't expecting anything like this. I told him everything I'd learned about his relationship with Kate. I knew my words would shock him, but I wasn't going to give him the chance to justify himself. He stayed silent, trying to process what was happening, but in his eyes I saw confusion and fear. I couldn't let him leave just like that. I made him understand that his actions wouldn't go unpunished. We discussed what needed to be done, and I already knew how to get back everything that had been dear to me. But at that moment, I felt like I was losing something more than just my relationship with Kate. I was losing myself. This game, this revenge, had become my only goal, and I no longer knew who I was without it. I was standing on the edge, unsure whether it would be easier for me when I completed this plan or if, instead, I would sink even deeper into my grief and despair. When I finally prepared the last part of my plan, I knew the moment of truth had come. I had been waiting for this moment eagerly, but inside I felt an emptiness. What would I feel when everything was over? Revenge? Satisfaction? Or even greater disappointment? All I knew was that I couldn't stop now. I decided to take my revenge publicly. Everything was set up in such a way that Kate wouldn't be able to hide her betrayal. I framed her in such a way that there was no escape from punishment. All her colleagues, friends, acquaintances found out who she really was, and I witnessed her world collapsing in an instant. She tried to justify herself, but it was too late. Michael turned out to be even more vulnerable than I thought. In my trap, he was confronted with the fact that everything he had been hiding was exposed. His career, his reputation, everything he had built, I destroyed with a single move. But no matter how hard I tried, I didn't feel satisfaction. At some point, I realized that I had become part of the game, the only player in it, and now there was nowhere for me to go. Revenge didn't bring peace. On the contrary, it consumed me. I looked at her as she stood there, in the midst of her ruined world, and understood. We had both lost. But what else was there to do? It was too late to retreat. A few days passed after I'd put the final point on my plan, and all I felt was emptiness. I thought that once I got my revenge, I would feel satisfaction, as if there would be some kind of closure to this story, and I could move on. But nothing like that happened. My soul remained empty, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Kate tried to justify herself, tried to get back what we had lost, but I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It wasn't genuine remorse. It was just an attempt to return to the old life, as if nothing had happened. But I knew she was no longer the woman with whom I had built a future. With each passing day, I understood that revenge had brought neither joy nor satisfaction. I had destroyed not only her life, but my own. By destroying hers, I lost myself. I had become what I had long dreamed of, strong and independent. But in reality, I was a lonely, broken person who didn't know how to live anymore. Michael disappeared from my life. I never saw him again. His career was destroyed, and it seemed he had lost all hope. But what did I care? His life no longer mattered once I had won. Months passed. All I did was exist. I lived, but I wasn't living. Work, apartment, usual circle of friends, everything became a gray background. I was fixated on what had happened, but at the same time, I was cut off from the world. At some point, I realized I couldn't continue like this. Revenge had borne its fruits, but I didn't feel like a winner. I was a man who had lost everything that once gave my life meaning. I decided to start over, without Kate, without revenge, without Michael. I started looking for answers inside myself, and surprisingly, I found them. It wasn't something instant, but gradually I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't an easy process, but I learned to let go. I understood that holding on to the past meant staying captive to my emotions. My life didn't become perfect, and maybe I would never be who I was before this tragedy, but I started accepting myself. I realized that I didn't need to seek solace in revenge. What mattered was learning to forgive, but most importantly, learning to forgive myself. Understanding came with time. Looking back, I realized that revenge was just an illusion, created by my passions and pain. I thought that when it was all over, I would feel relief, but I only destroyed my soul. When you become too attached to the idea of revenge, You lose the ability to move forward. I learned to let go, and it was difficult. Not because I forgave Kate, but because I forgave myself for everything that happened, for those moments of weakness, for the mistakes I made. I was no longer ready to build my life around revenge and hatred. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't make the same mistakes again. I would move forward, step by step, even if it was difficult. Now, when I look back, it seems to me that this whole story wasn't just a tragedy. It was a lesson that revenge doesn't bring happiness, a lesson that what matters isn't just what you've been through, but what you take away from it. I was able to forgive and move on, but it wasn't an easy process. I'm still learning to be myself. Today, I can say that I have finally begun to live again, not as the person consumed by revenge and pain, but as someone who has realized their worth. Kate has gone from my life, and I don't mourn her departure. I have become someone who knows how to look forward, despite everything that happened. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking understanding. I don't want to destroy others' lives. I want to rebuild my own life, to live with peace in my soul. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson I have learned. Revenge can destroy everything, but forgiveness and the ability to move forward, that's what gives life. I don't know what awaits me in the future, but I am no longer afraid of it. I have learned to live with myself and accept what was. This is my path, my new path, and I am walking it.